Okay. Hiya. Good morning, all. You okay? Awake? All right. Lecture number 4. Critical theory. Critical thinking, not critical theory. All right, last time I spoke about Gayatri Spivak, and I had planned today to talk about Stefano Honey and Fred Moten's essay book, The Undercommons, and their work generally. Thinking about what it is that we should be concerned about in the university, issues around the university. But, yeah, I'm still going to talk about that. And this lecture was one of 2 in the first part of this course where I wanted to read very carefully a text with you in the second half. But I think you've been reading that text, Undercommons, and found it very difficult. I hope it is difficult. And I want to go very slowly on that, and I will maybe spend 2 weeks on that text. But in this course, what I want to read carefully with you is some authors like Walter Benjamin and Spivak, Derrida, Fanon, Veblen, and Kakmak. We get through all of them, great. If we don't, that's also okay. But changing things a bit today, because I found out yesterday that a guy who was a friend, although we had arguments, David Graeber, died yesterday. And I'm a bit cut up about that. Bit of a shock. He was 4 days older than me. In my University of London job, Goldsmiths, I moved from one department to another half-time so he could come and have a job, because he was at Yale University in America, in the USA, and they had not given him tenure because he said of his politics, his anarchist politics. Anarchist politics, well, I'm not the one to go into what anarchist politics is. It's another tradition of left politics, I suppose, but they have a lot of overlap with communists. But going back to the International Working Men's Association, in the 1870s, the anarchists with Bakunin and especially in France, the anarchists went in one direction, and the Marxists, Karl Marx, Engels, Engel, went in another direction. And in a way, anarchism and communism were 2 parallel but separate left movements. I know, shorthand, anarchists are not interested in having any kind of state, any kind of nationwide governance. Or they will have a autonomous or self-governance of small community groups. Communists, while we will see the overthrow of the bourgeois state, we'll still have a dictatorship of proletariat, a state that will manage the transition from socialism to communism. So different traditions. Also a different way of working, I think. And that might have been part of the problem with some of the things, some of the debates we had. But there's no question that David Graeber was a prolific activist, first of all, and writer. He was an anthropologist, an anarchist anthropologist. And relevant for today, he wrote, well, 2 books in recent years, in the last 5 years, that are really relevant today. I wish I had a stick. This one, Bullshit Jobs, which is a funny title, and was written with a bit of verve, excitement. And this one, in 2015, The Utopia of Rules. So these will tell you a bit about anarchism. Anarchists, they are not interested in having someone tell them what to do. And they're not interested in doing things that seem stupid, pointless, bullshit. So he was very critical of bureaucracy, especially. The Utopia of Rules, right, is a critique of the very thing that we will talk about today, from Moten and Hani. The rules and regulations of the global university system, what's called audit culture. I've mentioned this before. Audit culture. That's a polite term for all of the excessive form filling and administrative work that has to be done in the university today. That is not like the work of a university professor, and why I left the University of London in part, had become more and more form filling and checking and filling in documents, writing down course guides and outcomes and aims and endlessly putting down on paper these things, much more than teaching and talking to students or reading or researching. When I started my work, and this I'll explain is true for the English university, the Australian university, I think the American university, or the university in India and Vietnam perhaps. It's coming, I see it. But over 30 plus years now, 33, my God, 37 years of teaching. What used to be the bread and butter of teaching, which was standing with people, talking with people, sitting or standing, talking about ideas, had been slowly more and more replaced by putting things on paper like bureaucratic forms. Graeber's argument is this: in the Utopia of Rules, but especially in Bullshit Jobs, is that increasingly in neoliberal capitalism, people are being asked to do things that is kind of like time waste. Or in India, you have a phrase for it, time pass, which is quite nice because it's not proper English. Kind of a new word they invented, so it's appropriate. Time pass, just doing things. You're employed by the company to do things like, I don't know, checking the internet system is working or something like that don't really need to be done. And in fact, in Bullshit Jobs, there's Graeber shows, there are some jobs where people are employed just to keep them off the streets, or as tax incentives, or as just as kind of cosmetic filling up of the company with bodies, to provide small services that aren't really necessary, or to even just occupy time. So you can see he was probably never going to have a job at Yale University, which is the university and in the center of capitalism, right? The center of the West. They were always going to find it a bit problematic that someone with these kind of views, radical, anarchist view, would not survive in that university where it's all about training people for jobs and thinking you're worthwhile because of that. He wanted to say, but humans are not just their jobs. Something like that, right? And especially when those jobs are not fulfilling. All right, I don't think that we have the same level of bureaucracy here yet, but I see it sneaking in sometimes. Always having to fill in the forms and get the stamp, and bureaucracy under this system is also growing. But in England, wow, it's a real nightmare. I mean, I knew one professor, famous professor from Manchester, and he had to write for a course that he has taught for 25 or 35 years, I can't remember how long. For so many years, he taught the same course on governance and political theory. He had to write a set of aims and outcomes and put them on a piece of paper that went into the system. None of his students would ever see that document. The only people that would see that document were the administrators of the university, and they would see it just to make sure he had done the document. I mean, I suppose if he wasn't so respected and he wrote something like, I don't know, Graeber's bullshit jobs type of argument, somebody might have said, no, this shouldn't be taught. But he was a really well-known and established, guaranteed good teacher. But still he had to fill in this form, and he filled in the form, and then the people who check it said, no, this isn't good enough. The aims and the outcomes do not match up. You need to change it. So he got the form back, changed the font, went from Times New Roman to Baskerville, and sent it back exactly the same. And they said, thank you, yes, good. This is an example of bullshit jobs. They didn't want him to show that he'd really thought through what he was doing, the aims and the outcomes. All they needed to do was go through the process of doing a check and making a change. So he changed something that was nothing, the font. From Times New Roman to Baskerville, if you know your fonts, they are almost the same. Nearly identical, just a little bit smaller. So they approved that. It just shows that this administration in the British university system especially is useless, is pointless, is a waste of time, and it's to reduce, well, the creativity of education. Another thing that they did, and I remember specifically discussing this with David, was that in our university we had 15 or something departments, an arts college, right? And in 7 of those departments we had a course called critical theory. And the university administration said, well, this is not good. You are duplicating the same kind of work. Now, the administrators are all doing the same kind of work in every faculty, but in each critical theory course, it was a different perspective on critical theory. I mean, if you get 7 critical theorists in a room, you'll have 9 different versions of what critical theory should be. So, of course, students should have a range of different views. I mean, that's got to be true of everything. If you read carefully, even Karl Marx, you should find there are many different interpretations. All right, not just one. And you need to know them. Even if the party or whoever is going to say this one is more better, you still need to know the others. You need to know what David Graeber thinks about Karl Marx if you are to debate critical theory. So they wanted to reduce the number of teaching a number of courses teaching critical theory, have just one person do it to a bigger class, 600 or something in the class, but still they would have 25 administrators. So they would reduce the teaching load and increase the number of administrators to do the work of processing the students, getting the money from the students, etc. Because that's what it's really about, the financial incentive. So Graeber's critique of that was really useful, and it was based on, it came out of his way of working, was this, he would be involved in social movement activism. I mean, he started with, I don't know whether it's where he started, but I met him first through anti-globalization protests in the 1990s. So there was an ultra-globalization movement before 2001, before September 11th, and before Occupy and all of that. There was anti-globalization, which was against the World Trade Organization, against those global bodies, United Nations, but mainly the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, who were enforcing a global hierarchy where the Western powers were dictating terms to what we call the Global South, which included Vietnam, India, and so on. So in 1991, for example, the World Bank entered India through liberalization and put certain rules and restrictions on the Indian economy, which previously had been a closed economy. They had import substitution, and they had so they opened to globalization. And this was not to their advantage. It was to the advantage of the international corporations. Coca-Cola came in, started to profit. Indian companies that produce soft drinks went out of business. Thumbs Up and Campa Cola and Limca all lost. These are local Indian drinks companies, soft drinks companies. They lost market share to the global companies. But not only that, the International Monetary Foundation, the IMF, and the World Bank, they support the hegemony of the West, the benefits of the global North, if you like, and try to keep through their regulations and through their charity donor work, keep the rest of the world from real industrialization. So, well and good that Indonesia, China, or Vietnam will become processing countries, producing cheap commodities for the global market, because international companies can come in, set up those processing centers and profit from that. But the World Bank and IMF were stopping. They had policies that were restrictive of technology transfer, so that real industrialization, actual competition at the level of advanced industry with the North and the South was not possible under this system. So we protested that. The IMF and the World Bank also did this by lending money, saying we lend you money to industrialize and to catch up. But that catch up was always through being in second place. Instead of having advanced industry, having processing plants and so on. So we're protesting this, and anti-globalization movement was very strong, and it had elements of it like Reclaim the Streets and the anti-roads protests, really a little bit hippie in some ways, but really a youth movement that captured a certain spirit. Unfortunately, September 11, when the planes crashed into the World Trade Center, not insignificantly, this was a part of a very difficult period for the anti-globalization movement because they were put on the back foot because of the mobilization of the anti-Islamic terrorists movement. The World Bank, the World Trade Center, sorry, was attacked, and so the America, the US, and its allies like Australia, the UK, France, kind of went to war. And the anti-globalization movement both had to change tack to be an anti-war movement, and also was a little bit unsure how to argue against this threat, this seeming threat, mobilization of a kind of global jihad on the part of the West, a crusade, not jihad. Graeber was a part of the discussion trying to keep or recapture that drive of anti-globalization. So the anti-war movement in 2001 was really big, but failed to stop the war against Iraq because Iraq, unconnected to the bombing of the World Trade Center, but Afghanistan and Iraq became the targets of the West. George Bush, the younger, had to have an enemy, and Saddam Hussein had been the enemy of his father, so they went into Iraq, cost billions of dollars, killed hundreds of thousands of people, many more than the World Trade Center, and, you know, led to make America great with the kind of politics we see, almost fascism, that we see today. The anti-war movement kind of fizzled out because it didn't stop the war. But what came up in its place was a thing called Occupy. And Graeber was a part of that. And again, I saw him in this. Well, that was a bit later, Occupy, but the kind of things that led up to Occupy were also in the spirit of anti-globalization. In the meantime, yes, he'd been kicked out or not given tenure at Yale, and through the influence of, do you remember in the anthropology course talking about Michael Taussig? The influence of Michael Taussig, having a word to the head of my department, Steve Nugent, and me shifting to cultural studies, and a guy called Keith Hart going part-time, meant that we could give a job to Graeber, and he joined us in the UK, in London. And there he also got involved with the student protests of 2010. There was a thing called the University for Strategic Optimism, UFSO. There was a student movement that really started at a protest against the Conservative Party headquarters, where students went and occupied the offices of the Conservative political party, Boris Johnson's party, in London. It was our students that did that, and I remember being at that protest with David, and we were there for nearly the whole duration of that, talking with him a lot. And then over a period of maybe a year of student activism, going to lots of occupations where university offices were occupied by students. Students were protesting against what was wrong in the university in some way, or what was wrong in society. And to do that, their tactic was not to protest marching in the street in the old-fashioned way, because they saw that 2 million people marched in the anti-war movement in February 2003. 2 million people in London, that's 1 in every 20 from the country, went to one from the whole of England, 1 in every 20 people marched in the street against the war, but still the war went ahead. So they knew that marching in the street, politicians can just ignore. So their tactic changed to occupy the offices, to stop them from doing their bullshit jobs, to stop them from doing their usual administration, and to not leave until demands were met. Of course, quite often they were forced out by police or by security guards, or just by being, no water, no food, you're in a university office, it's not a great place to stay for weeks and weeks. But there were many occasions where we would have university classes inside the occupation or inside the protest. So his books, you see, 2015, 2018, they came out after that wave of student protest. And that student protest was also a part of a larger global wave of occupation of the center of the city by, you won't remember this, you were too young, but in 2010, 2011, there became a movement of city squares where the people under oppressive dictators like Hosni Mubarak in Egypt and in Tunisia and across the Arab world, in fact, there was a number, what was called the Arab Spring, a number of mobilizations of people where they occupied the center of the city in hundreds of thousands and would not go home until the dictator was gone. And they got rid of some of those dictators. Unfortunately, what then replaced those systems, because they weren't organized, they didn't have a political party like Ho Chi Minh, like the Communist Party, it became something worse in Egypt and so on. But also in Libya, for example, the Arab Spring was used to get rid of a good leader, Gaddafi. Instead, what's her name? Hillary Clinton got very excited when Gaddafi was executed in the street. One of the leaders of Africa, killed by NATO invasion. Okay, so in that context, the occupations in London wanted to be a part of that same kind of movement. No, they weren't really. I mean, the Arab Spring was this Arab thing, and London is not Arabic. But Graeber's work is focused on that. He was also, however, an anthropologist. So he did work in Madagascar, which is a country off the coast of Africa, on this side, Madagascar, which was a site where it was on the trade routes. When Europeans went around Africa to go to Asia, they quite often stopped in Madagascar because it was on the way. And then on the way back, they also brought bonded labor. So Madagascar's population was made up of a very mixed community over hundreds of years. And in fact was also the place where pirates would stop to escape from the East India Company or the British Navy that was trying, pirates, right, who mutinied. Think of Jack Sparrow and people like that. They had their own communities in Madagascar. So they lived there. So he did his field work in Madagascar, and the book that came of that is this one, The Lost People. I think that was his dissertation. And he, all right, it was 20 years ago from now he did that field work. But he always kept that interest in anthropology. So he wrote a very important book on the theory of value, inspired by Marcel Mauss in anthropology, the gift and gift exchange, how exchanging gifts is the essence of reciprocity. the essence of society, what glues society together. And it's a short, but really good, clear book. There's another one, an earlier one on Madagascar, I believe. His most important book, I think, is Direct Action, the Ethnography, which is the ethnography of the anti-globalization movement. He sits in meetings and meetings talking about how meetings in this activist movement proceed. Really interesting. But the book that made him super famous is this one called Debt, the first 5,000 years. And in that book, because it's a part of, remember, the World Bank was the enemy, the International Monetary Fund and the debt system that kept the countries of Global South always having to pay more of their surplus to finance their debt than to develop their countries, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and so on. They pay more money to the International Monetary Fund than they spend on looking after their own people. It's a kind of global crime. And he wrote this book saying, the thing about debt is you don't need to pay back your debt. Most often, debt is a way for a larger power to control what you're doing by making you indebted to them. And if you break that cycle, de-link from that system, debt is shown to be a kind of fiction. Now, that did not mean that people can just tear up their credit cards and forget about their credit card debt or forget about their mortgages, because the banks still and the real estate industry, property system is still in place, still has power over people. But he gave a theory that suggested you could break your debt. You know, and there are ways. If you're in credit card debt in the UK, there are now companies that will help you not pay back your debt. Of course, some people say, oh, but you lend the money. You should pay it back. Yeah, maybe. It's true. You lend the money, you benefited from it. But if they lend you the money to lock you into a system that is not in your interest, full of bullshit jobs or a way of extorting money from you to leave the country, remembering that many of the real estate agencies, the big real estate, real big property owners in the UK do not keep their money in the UK but take them out to offshore tax-free places, then you'll have no ethical responsibility to pay. And there are companies now that will help you not pay all of your debt back. Very interesting. And I think that book, although some people criticized its style, they said, oh, 5,000 years of anecdotes. That book was really influential. I mean, that got him on CNN, on New York Times, and so on. It got him a very big advance for his next book, which was the Democracy Project, I think, and wasn't as successful. His latest book is kind of a children's book, Uprisings for Kids. Yeah, so very important, and very important for what we're going to talk about today, but I'm really a bit sad that he died. And yeah, rest in peace, David Graeber. So something I discussed with him, actually, I remember giving a talk at an occupation at Goldsmiths, University of London. Inside the occupation, we had like a ad lib class. And we spoke together. He gave a talk, I gave a talk. And my talk was about the idea that education is not a social good. Everyone says education is a social good. I think you might agree. Education is good, right? Okay, but if you look from a certain perspective, and our perspective was in the UK, where there is a strong class system, and where if you are a benefit of good, expensive schooling, private schooling, and personal tutors, and the history of your family being in the well-to-do upper middle class, you then go to a good school and then a good university like Oxford or Cambridge and reinforce the class system. If you are not wealthy enough to go to a good school, do not have personal tutors, do not have the resources of the upper middle class or the upper class, you go to a less good school, a less good university, and you get a less good job. Education reinforces the class system. It's not always good to do that. And if you think of Graeber's bullshit jobs and the administration, education is also in the business now of taking money for reinforcing that system. In fact, there is a whole administrative structure of people who are in the business of keeping the hierarchy of higher education in place. In the business of making sure that the good schools remain the best schools. And they have these systems that we'll talk about called metrics and league tables so that parents who have enough money can send their kids to the best schools. Education is not neutral. It's not simply good. Yes, education like, talking about ideas and talking about and learning skills and all that, sure, good, grand. But why should the upper class have the best education? To get even more upper and upper, while the lower classes only get education as a kind of childcare. Just keeping them at school so they're not running around on the streets causing trouble until they will get a job as plumbers or builders or shopkeepers or something. So many schools, I don't know enough about Vietnam to know if it's also true here, but so many schools do not really teach creativity and inspiration. They just keep things going because they don't have the resources. The teachers aren't always well paid enough. They don't have all the kit, computers and so on that the wealthy schools have. I mean, we are in Ton Duc Thanh University, #1 university in Vietnam, right? Not every university has nice wooden desks and, well, yeah, they all have desks, but I don't know, a beautiful library and things like that come from being wealthy. And not everyone can come to this university, right? Now, education, so, must, by its structure, reinforce what is already there in society. So, yeah, it's not the fault of education, it's the fault of society. We are everywhere in the world becoming more unequal. In the UK, that society for hundreds of years has been a class-based society. And the distance between the lower working class and upper class, both ends don't go to university anymore actually, but is huge. So it's a system that is producing product that reinforces that society system. And they do it with a rhetoric a rhetoric, a special language of education, which is about merit. Okay, the people who go to the good schools that show that they have intellect, they're excellent in so many ways, which they're excellent because they've always been well taught with the best resources. They are the ones that deserve to go to the best universities because they got the best results. Why did they get the best results? Because they could afford to have cramming tutors, good teachers, good resources. They weren't at a crowded classroom with a teacher who's not very well paid with, well, in the UK, you see some schools, the projector doesn't work. I mean, there's not enough resources to really make the school work as education. The classes are too big. And that's a big thing. And parents, they're encouraged to decide, like if you can afford it, send your child to the school where the classes are smaller, the resources are good. Of course you would do that. If you're a parent, you want the best for your child that you can afford. But not everyone can afford that. So that reinforces that class system. The key word is excellence, and you see this in the documents. So in that debate discussion with David Graeber, we got to some serious issues. I guess I want to say, even if you go to the best schools, even if you go to the best university, there's no guarantee that you'll be smart. In fact, some of the rich who go to those schools, they are by breeding, by habit, quite dumb, quite stupid. But they have the money to pay their way, right? It's also a corrupt system. It's not really based on excellence and merit. And if you are the poorest of the poor, that's no guarantee that you will not be smart. In fact, some of the people I see succeed the best are from the lower, so-called lower classes. So I'm talking about this, and the key point here is that education rewards reinforcing a hierarchical system, but it does so with a rhetoric of excellence. And if you don't take on the challenge and the risk of just getting in and doing it, you're reinforcing that class system. I already said I've been watching education reforms for more than 30 years. Mostly my examples are India and the UK. That's the system I know. Australia a lot, that's where I started, but 20 years in the UK at least, and 30 years going back and forth to India. And interestingly, India has a really good policy, actually. Education policy, social policy. Its constitution, the Constitution of India was written by Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar, he was an untouchable, a Harijan, a Dalit, the lowest caste. They have a caste system in India, but it's sort of like a class system. The lowest level is the untouchable or the Dalit, and a leader from the Dalit class wrote the Constitution of India, and it's a good document. If the Indian government would follow it, it would be great. But the distance between the document and what really happens is very far. And this is another problem with the administration, the utopia of rules in Graeber's book, the administration of universities. Very, very good documents saying we will do the best education and we will have the best equipment, we'll have this and that, and we will really listen to parents and to students, and we'll be inclusive and transparent. But the reality is much more determined by economic and making money. In the UK, certainly. In India too. Right now they are having a huge debate about identity cards and I'm not going to go into that actually today. But the reason for doing that is it's relevant for Vietnam actually to think about some of the issue we talked about last week, I think. If you have a lot of your best students going overseas for higher degrees, right? And I'm sure some of you, I don't know, maybe I should ask, some of you thinking of going overseas for a higher degree for research, if you can. Now COVID, right? Harder to do. For this generation, maybe a rethink is happening. But certainly 5 years ago, I think, nearly everyone who was going to do a higher degree wanted to do it in Australia, America, UK, Europe, something like that. Maybe Taiwan. That was also true in India for many, many years. The very best Indian students always aim to go to UK or US for higher studies. But in the last 20 years, they realized that to send your best people for 4 years, and sometimes a lot more than 4 years because they stay, to send them away is not good for the nation. You lose their creative energy for the best part of their lives. The part of their lives when they have the most creative energy, right? So the idea of sending them away, okay, if they come back after the 4 years with the degree and some skills and so on, great, but not everyone came back. So while you want some to go and get that experience, increasingly in India, they started to build a strong university system, an elite university system within the country, and keep the best students in the Indian Institutes of Management within India. And watching that is very interesting because the demographics of it is really something. I don't think I have no, okay. How many of you know how many people are in India? Bao nhiêu người? How many people? Or how many people in South Asia, the old India? India before, if you take India, right, and Bangladesh and Pakistan, Sri Lanka, oh, that's a very good Sri Lanka, and Nepal. China has what? 1.4 billion. 1.4 T, approximately. And China is really pushing hard for English education in universities, right? India 1.1, even nearly 1.2 T. Bacham, no, sorry, 3 T, 2 T. No. 2, sorry, 200 2, 300 2. So you add up this, you'll get to about 1.5 T. getting on to 1/5 of the population of planet Earth. That's a lot. Within that, many, many more are going to university now. And within that, as I said, 300 million are speaking English because of colonialism, right? They didn't have this French, which is, all right, important language, but not helping you right now. No Ting Vap, anyone? No one speaks Ting Vap? No, it's okay. A shame, some very good literature in Ting Vap, but in India, 300 million English speakers, and all of them have smartphone. Okay, China has a lot of people with a smartphone, but they are communicating to each other in Chinese, right? In India, more people than in England, almost as many people in the US, speaking English using social media. 300 million speakers under 30 years old. Youth, young demographic. Think of what that will change. How that will change social media when that moves out into the networks. Right now, yeah, it's happening, beginning to have an effect on university. But it's going to cause some real rupture, especially when now they are starting to do their higher degrees within the country and commit to Indian national interests, which are not those of the rhetoric of Ambedkar, but of Modi, the current leader of India, very conservative. But, okay, the numbers are interesting. So I'm not saying that when I will criticize excellence and hierarchy, I think demographics, the numbers, are very important. But how you analyze them, whether or not you take meaningful stuff from the numbers or just administrative bullshit. Unfortunately, in audit culture, we have a system of auditing. Okay, audit culture. I think I talked about this last week. Like you have accountants who check whether a company is doing, their books are in order. So auditing is that checking. Sure, there should be people to check. Check that the documents are in order, that the business of the university is running well, that the leadership is not corrupt. Sure, check. Right, we are doing that right now. But doing that over and over at every level and focusing only on that and forgetting about teaching is the problem. And metrics tends to do that. The system of audit culture we have now, we call it metrics. This has been the main change in the way in which universities run in the last 30 years. The global university system is not based on who is a good teacher, what is good teaching, but on a metrics of research. It's a kind of calculus, and it's a very blunt tool. And it doesn't care about what happens in the classroom. It cares about what happens when you audit what happens in the classroom. So they're taking a statistical, not even in the classroom actually, with the teacher, they're auditing research. How much money did the researchers make for the university? The boss of my university said this: in London. He said, John, so how does your research help British industry? How are you helping companies make money with your research? And my research is in anthropology, right? Then it was about anti-racism and anti-terrorism. Who can make money from that? Maybe the police or something. I'm not going to work for them, the British police. So the gap is metrics is this blunt tool, and I want to explain why. So you understand how the administrative systems of the British university and the Indian university, and I expect here too, are not concerned with whether you are learning something, whether the quality of teaching is radical left-wing anarchist or right-wing who knows what. They are concerned with the contribution of the faculty's research to the economy. The economy, but done in a very, actually, not even effective way, I think. Metrics is such a blunt tool that it doesn't even do the job it should do well, because it puts everyone into the same calculation. We need better ways. So the problems with metrics. Okay, one size fits all. There's a major problem. Metrics measures, for example, one way of doing metrics to see if the research of our faculty, for example, is world-class. No, not even world-class. Is good in some way. Is not to read the work and understand what it's about, right? That would take a long time, I admit. You can't do that. How many papers are produced by faculties of sociology in one country in 1 year? Let's say, I'm guessing, sociology departments in Vietnam, 20, maybe? 30? University of Social Sciences and Humanities, VNU, Fulbright, RMIT. All right, let's just go with 20. And let's say in each department there are, in our faculty we have maybe 5 or 6 people who are active researchers. Each of those 6 people will write 3, or I did 5, but let's say at least 2 articles every year. So 30 by 6 by 2 is 3600. No, 360, right? Yeah. 360 articles produced in sociology in Vietnam per year. No one is going to read them all. No one can read that many every year. So you cannot measure quality of sociology in Vietnam or any other country that's bigger by the content. So you need some other way to measure. And the way that the world has decided, and remember, not just sociology, for every discipline, the same kind of numbers, science, biology, mathematics, geography, blah, 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 blah. So many papers are being produced, but no one can look at their content. So we look at how many times each one paper is used by another paper through citations. So you have what's called a citation index. So how many times did my article that I wrote, blah, 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 on blah, 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 doesn't matter, how many times did it get quoted by someone else in an article? And if that article that quoted my article is a good journal, it gets 100 points, say, or 1 point, whatever. If it's a not such good journal, it gets 50 or half a point. And if it's not on the ISI list, Scopus, ISI, these are lists of journals, quality of journals, then it gets no points. So we can work out a statistical measure based on how many times my article is quoted. And each person can then be ranked in a universal list, okay? But how many times do I get quoted? If I write something about the life of Karl Marx or about David Graeber or something, it can be a very good article or a very bad article. If it's very good, maybe some people will quote it because they like David Graeber or Karl Marx or whoever. But if I write something really, really bad, either no one will quote it, so no points, or it's so bad that everyone mentions it because they're critical. As Hutnick said in that article, which is completely wrong, blah, 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 blah. So the measure of citation doesn't tell you whether it's good or bad. Quite often, in my articles anyway, when I write about something, it's the things that people get wrong that you write about. So you quote people for being wrong. You say, it's not correct that Malinowski said blah, 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 blah. So I have quoted Malinowski. So he's quoted. So his ranking citation index goes up, even though I was trying to disagree. So one size cannot fit all, because in some disciplines you do critique of other authors, but in other disciplines you do reports on experiments. So there's no citation except in the history of other experiments like your one. As Watson and Crick have experimented with DNA, we also think that blah, 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 blah. Yeah, you do a literature survey or something, but not critical. So from faculty to faculty, the effect of citation is different. But the metric system cannot cope with that. In fact, what it does is reinforce a certain style of writing. People then who are very cynical will write more outrageous things and get quoted more often. If you say some outrageous thing, like, I don't know, bullshit jobs, for example, people will quote you. But what it really usually reproduces is a certain formula of a kind of upper class finishing school, of being a good student, doing things in the right way, in the conventional, not taking so many risks and doing things to the formula, repeating the same style of paper over and over. So it narrows creativity. It also inflates, on a short-term basis, the status of some university. So you do very well in the metric of quotation in this year. It means you can quickly, because you get a financial incentive for that, hire some new staff. But new staff do not immediately start writing articles that get a good metric. So the more people you bring in, the less your metric score will keep rising. It will necessarily fall because not everyone can keep working at that high level. The more successful you are, the more you have to button up and be safe, and the less you will be able to produce those things that get you a high metric. So it's unsustainable. You can't keep going up because you have to hire new people. And they have to be younger, of course, because there are not that many people doing research on these huge numbers, right? And because there are pressures, right? If you do very well, like we did in anthropology, we did in University of London, Goldsmiths, we were very successful in anthropology because the top faculties were, top anthropology departments were Oxford, Cambridge, LSE. And anthropology in Goldsmiths was not strong, but it came up and up and up because it had all the ones that didn't fit into the top universities, the radical Marxist, feminist, and David Graeber, all the people that didn't fit, so they came up and up and up in the ranking because they were different. But as they came up and up and up in the ranking, we got more money, we started to hire some of the best people from the top universities who were very Oxford and Cambridge in style. So we became, Goldsmiths, University of London, became more and more like the top universities. And therefore they couldn't be different anymore. They couldn't compete. So if you want to be like that, Oxford and Cambridge, go there. Don't go to Goldsmiths. That became, we lost the radical edge that made them competitive. This metric stuff, because it demands that you keep on producing that metric score, and you, by structure, cannot, because you really have to work on content. It produces incredible stress. I'm not sure you notice that in the staff, because they are really suffering more and more stress. And I see, in my career over 37 years, more and more people are sick, physically sick, because of the stress of their administrative bullshit job. And that's why I worry about David Graeber. He died yesterday from COVID, sure, but also from overwork. Who knows what the reasons are? He was taken sick in a restaurant, rushed to hospital and died within a day. But he'd been sick with COVID during the summer. So we don't know. Anyway, we should have a 5-minute break. Thank you. After the break, we'll talk a little bit more about this, and then I'm going to focus on the reading of the text of the undercomments. Thanks very much. What's the time now? We'll stop for 5 minutes. 10:55, so at 11. Come back at 11 o'clock. Thank you. Stop the recording. Start again soon, part B.